my favorite quotations of all time. I love quotations. What I love about art in general is I love art that I think about later on in my life. Maybe I'm thinking about the movie I watch when I'm in the shower, or I'm having a conversation with somebody and I can bring up a factoid from a book I read, something like that. And what I love about quotations is they often can consolidate so much of a story or a worldview, or just a thought into a short amount of space. That's one of my favorite parts about quotations. They're knowledge condensed. And so I'm really happy to share with you some of my favorites, some of the ones that have stuck out to me over my short lifespan today. They're going to be in the description of this video if you want to read along with me, or I'll just read them out as we go along. So first one, if at first you don't succeed, give up and move on. Man, I love this quotation because I wrote it. I wrote this one. Okay, very stupid. Yes, I know. The first one I wrote, but I didn't set up the order of this. And the reason why I like this is because in game development, I have to say and even software engineering, I will say in general, there's a strong zeitgeist, a sentiment that is, it's present, it's omnipresent, and it is to say, hey, you know what? If you can't figure it out, then go to Stack Overflow and keep working on it forever. And I hate it. I really don't think it's a good practice, because I think that's important, but it's important to also have a culture where it's okay to ask questions. And I think there's some people who are going to take advantage of that, and maybe they're going to take up more space than they realize is appropriate. But when people can be respectful, I think it makes a lot more sense to put in practice a practice where they can ask questions when they get stuck. I hate hearing that a designer I'm working with has been toiling with the tool trying to figure out how it works, and they get frustrated. It's way better that before somebody gets frustrated on a problem for me, I say, just let me know what the problem is, right? When I've worked with Scott, he's not technical. He might face a bug. I tell him, hey, if you get stuck, just let me know what the problem is, and then I'll fix it. Because I think getting frustrated and losing that passion, that motivation is way worse than, wasting 5 minutes of my time. And maybe I do view my role on a game dev team or teaching somebody as a very service-oriented role, so I think it's important to come in there, and not everybody shares that approach, but I think it's really important. So I'll say, hey, if you get stuck, just let me know how I can help you. I think that's something that's been a big impact on how I see the world. And I'm hoping also with these quotations you'll get a better feel for what I think about stuff, because I'm making the list, aren't I? What's the next one here? If there's nothing left to burn, set yourself on fire. Holy shit, that's a crazy quote. What I love about, oh my gosh. Whew, that's a tough one. Man, that's one of those quotes that I think you could read so many different ways, and you can come back to it way later and have a different perspective. And that's something I like about art too, is sometimes you listen to a song, doesn't really resonate with you, you come back 10 years later and now you love it. Or the music, you liked it as a kid, but now it doesn't sound so good. Or some of the best stuff, for example, maybe you watch a movie and you can relate to the son in his relationship to the father, but then now you're an older adult, maybe you got a kid yourself, and now you watch the movie and you're thinking about it from the dad's perspective. I love that stuff, and I think this particular quote, if there's nothing left to burn, set yourself on fire, that's one of those quotes that you're going to see a very different perspective on it based on where you are in life. Right now I'm thinking a little bit about insurrection. I'm thinking about how people might want to rebel against society, and I'm thinking, if there's no one to fight, maybe people will fight themselves. Maybe there's something here about 1984, George Orwell, where they say, it's important for the nations to be in a constant state of war so that the nations themselves are in a constant state of internal peace, and there's an external aggressor, right? The guy who they all yelled at. So there's a lot there I think we can unpack. But those are just some of my first thoughts. I guess I can't go too deep in any of these because this video will take forever then. But let's jump to the next one. All right, Robert M. Pirsig. He says, want to make a perfect painting? Simple. Become perfect and then paint naturally. I love that. So what's he saying there? I mean, I guess I should just be saying them, not trying to interpret each one. But I think what stands out to me here is this idea of perfection, and what does it mean? I think it's a good take on it. Okay, so the next one's from Sid Meier. He says, double it. So this is This is, of course, a classic piece of advice from him. I got this from the Will Wright Masterclass on masterclass.com. He's talking about how, you want to be a game designer. Will Wright is referring to Sid Meier on this one. Will Wright, obviously an incredible creator in his own respect. The Sims, SimCity, Sim Park, Spore, maybe. And he is like, hey, you know what? Sid Meier is who I'm going to go to for advice. And I love that, right? I love going to one of your heroes and seeing who their heroes are, right? It's like, oh man, you think Beethoven's cool? Let me tell you about Bach. So I think that's always interesting. And of course, this quote referring to Sid Meier says double it. What he's referring to is whenever you are tuning something and it doesn't feel right, you're not sure, oh, you know what? This maybe the reload speed for the gun, I'm not sure if it should be 30 seconds or 45 seconds. He says, look, just double it. And then you'll know for sure if you're heading in the right direction. So go maybe from 30 seconds to 60 seconds, or maybe from 30 to 15. And then from there, you can then go down or up. You could figure it out. So he says just double it. And it's a really great way for tuning stuff from a design perspective. Okay, what's next? Joel Olstein. Filling in your race with your determined score, my heavenly Father is the creator of the universe. Oh, right, okay. So this is an interesting thing, I would say. This is a much longer video, much longer discussion, but so it's sort of two quotes in one. So the first one is this idea that I read this factoid in some research article, some publication, where they said that, women and people who are not white do worse on tests, particularly black and brown children. They do worse on tests if before they take the test, they have to fill out one of those Scantron forms and write their ethnicity and their gender. Apparently, a woman just writing that she's a female before she takes the test has statistically been shown to decrease the score. Crazy, right? Crazy science kind of stuff that would have the impact, right? This is like Freakonomics kind of stuff. But that's the situation, right? And so I thought about that, and I thought, that sucks. That's terrible. What an injustice. And then I thought, oh, what if there's a way to use that head fake but in a different way, And so I was thinking about that. And Joel Olstein had a quote. He's a proselytizer for the Christian faith. He has this huge mega church. He's one of those people who does church on TV and stuff like that. He's got books with his face on it and stuff. And so he was so he said something different, right? I'm going to go to a different example now for his quote, and then I'll bring it back. So he was in school, and he was in school with a lot of people whose fathers were prominent businessmen. And he felt a little bit uncomfortable because they had all these really impressive fathers, and his dad didn't amount to very much, apparently, or something like that. So his dad is maybe a loser, and everybody else's dad is some big mega millionaire. And so he said, oh, how am I going to compete to these guys? They've got destiny on their side. They've got legacy on their side. And what do I've got? And he said, you know what? Their father may have created the company, but my heavenly Father is the creator of the universe. So he's dipping into his faith there as a little way to recontextualize the situation, right? He's sort of just how the people who were writing there were female believed this lie that, essentially being a woman is going to mean for sure you're going to do worse on the test. Of course, that's not true. He was believing, and I guess, whatever mythology you want to believe, whether it's, Jesus or, something else, right? He's believing that his heavenly Father is now the most powerful person ever, right? So he's creating his own, he's recontextualizing the situation in order to sort of sell it to himself, and I think that's amazing. So what I thought is, you should figure out why you are destined to do well on the test, and then just think about that before you take the test. So one of those things could be if you're perhaps a white person, you could say, hey, you know what? I statistically will do better on the test than somebody of any other race. Obviously that could be a little dangerous because that's just for touching into Nazi stuff, right? But you could say something you know what? My father was a great engineer and my mother was a great engineer, and I'm going to be a great engineer, and for that reason I'm going to ace this engineering test. So you could maybe do something like that. That's probably a lot more approachable than the first thing, which is probably a little bit spicy. So that's like a cool idea. Maybe you could try that out. And so it's just this idea of like, hey, you know what? If there's these head fakes where, you know, kids are doing terrible on these tests because, you know, they believe their gender is telling them they can't be good at math. Well, hey, you know what? We can redesign that. You know, we could take maybe a woman whose dad did some math, or maybe she did well on her previous test and she's just doubting herself on this moment, and she could say, I got 100 on my last test, I'll get 100 on this test, you know, and sort of use those, you know, it's sort of a lie, right? You don't really know for sure if 100 on your last test is going to affect this one, but you can use that lie for a good purpose rather than a negative purpose to sort of beat you down. The lie could be to make you succeed, you know? Maybe women statistically do worse on this test, but I'm going to be the first woman to get a perfect score or something like that. You know, you can sort of build yourself up. All right, I'm talking way too long about this one, but there was some spicy territory, so I wanted to negotiate it and hopefully not say anything too controversial. Okay, so the next thing is, oh my God, I love this one. Holy shit, this is such a good quote. Jonathan Blow said this to me when I was interviewing him. Jonathan Blow is a great designer of video games and somebody I really look up to, certainly a hero of mine in the games industry. And he said to me, professional is another way to say not personal. And I think that's so true. Professional is another way to say not personal. Wow, I could talk about that for an hour, but I'm not going to. Let's see, what's next? I got a quote from Scott here. He says, the more you work on it, the more you'll be disappointed when no one likes it. I don't really agree with that, but I think it's a good quote. I think a lot of times I do some of my works for me, you know, and so maybe I'll invest more time in it because I will know there's a bug, you know, or I will know it's less than perfect. But I think for some people who are getting a lot, and, you know, people always say like, oh, it's bad to be externally gratified or something like that. There's a lot of sentiment about that where it's like you need to do things for you. And hey, I think it's fine to do things for other people, you know, to be oriented in such a way where it's like, hey, you know, I'm doing a concert tonight. Let's say I'm a pianist, and I really get a kick out of it when the crowd applauses. And if they don't applause, I'm going to be sad because I want to play music for them. I don't think that's a bad thing. So, you know, if you're somebody who is wired in that way, where you get a lot out of it from what other people receive, then maybe that's a good quote for you to think about. I don't know if it's necessarily true though. Me and Scott disagree on a lot of things, as you know. One of the greatest. Okay, this is from Jacob Collier, one of the greatest musical minds I think of today. Such a beautiful young man, beautiful mind. He says, one of the greatest challenges and privileges of being an artist is learning how to alchemize the forces in your life to create with. Couldn't agree more. I think that's so true. Not every work is personal, but I think some of the works that have stuck with us the most, or stuck with me the most, I should say, have come from what felt like a personal place from the author. And I think being a creative is often a matter of coalescing all these influences and trying to find a way to, as he says, alchemize those influences into something creative. I think that's a beautiful way to think of it. This is a quote from Mark Norris. I actually have two quotes from Mark Norris, I think. I think these are both from Mark. I'm not sure. Mark Norris is, I think, a creative director from Hangar 13. I worked under him for a while. And, man, I love working with some really talented visionaries. It's a pleasure. My industry has the privilege, my jobs have had the privilege to work with some people who are really, really awesome and really creative and really fun. And so this guy had some really great quotes. He clearly thought very deeply about the work he was doing, and I really appreciated that. And one of the things he would always tell his team, and I love this, is he said, you know, we can do anything, but not everything. And I thought that was a fascinating way to think about the problem. You know, he was on a team that was well funded, you know, and a team that if they set their mind on creating a really great first-person shooter, then they could get a really clean, tight first-person shooter mechanic, you know? But if they wanted to do a real-time strategy game, they could probably do that really well, or get a level progression system. They could really focus on that, or maybe a really good story. They could really focus on that, or a beautiful, breathtaking vistas, an open world situation with AI that moves on its own. They could focus on that as well, but they can't do everything. And so I thought that was a great way to phrase it. We could do anything, but we can't do everything. This idea that anything is possible. I don't want to limit our ideas. We can do this or that, but we can't do all of it. We have to focus on what's going to be our strengths and really put our energy and effort behind that and honing it. And I thought that was a beautiful quote. The other thing he says, and this is in a similar vein, he had I believe, an Air Force background. And a lot of people at Hangar 13, I mean, Hangar 13 is named because the game studio, in case you don't know, is in an Air Force hangar, right? It's literally in a hangar. Which one? The 13th, of course. Hangar 13. That's why they call it that. And he was talking about the military or the Air Force, and he was saying how a general is called a general because they're a generalist. He says generals are generalists. And I thought that was a great way to think about management in general, because the truth is, as you become, let me lower that music a little bit. As you become higher in a managerial role, you know, you're doing less content creation, individual contribution, you're doing more people management, you're going to be further and further separated from the work. And I think you're going to need to have a wider scope, a wider picture of everything that's going on. And I think that's actually very important. He talked to me particularly about the Air Force. He said, when I was a fighter pilot, I knew every button, everything to know about my fighter plane, my particular plane. But when you're higher level, you got to know about a little bit about all the different planes and how they work in concert as a team. And I think that's actually one of the most important parts. I think the main difference between a junior or associate level engineer, or really any role, and somebody who's mid-level to senior level, is thinking beyond themselves. It's saying, you know what? I'm not going to focus on just my part of the problem. I'm focusing on my part of the problem and how it fits into the bigger picture. And how am I affecting, if I'm an engineer, how am I affecting the writers, the artists, the designers? How does my role play in concert with their roles? I think that wider perspective is a big factor in maturity when it comes to working in any discipline, particularly, obviously, team-based disciplines where you have to work on a team. It's very relevant then. What's next? Okay, Keanu Reeves. So this is a quote from Keanu Reeves. Love Keanu, of course, the famous actor who said, "You're breathtaking," when he did the reveal for Cyberpunk 2077. That's not this quote, though. This quote is, he says, "We entertained." I love that quote from him. He was talking about video games. And I don't remember, it was on a talk show. And I think the sentiment of the conversation was sort of going like, oh, you know, you're just making action movies, you know? You're doing something that I guess is kind of low brow. You're doing something that's kind of silly. You're making an action movie. What's the value? And Keanu was saying, you know, we entertained. And he was really just giving that line so much gusto, so much life. And I think what I withdrew from that, obviously it's a very short quote, it's only 2 words, but what I took away from that is this idea that, you know, there's an incredible amount of value being delivered just in entertaining someone, just in providing someone, maybe it's, and there's so many ways to have fun, right? But one way is just to give somebody a break from their day. Just give somebody that outlet to just enjoy something. Maybe to just I believe the word is called subjugation. It sounds like a little bit of a sexy word, but subjugation, or maybe a little bit of a slavery word. But subjugation is it's a game design term. I think it comes from maybe it's Huizinga, I'm not sure, but subjugation is when is considered a form of play. It may be also the other guy, I forget his name, but the idea of subjugation is this idea of like, I'm just going to follow the rules of this game, and those rules are the rules of my world for this moment, and I don't have to worry about my job my kids, my wife, maybe my divorce. I don't need to worry about that right now. I'm just going to just subjugate myself to the rules of this game and be a player and be entertained. And I think that's a form that maybe someone might call that a form of escapism. That's a form of entertainment for sure. That's a theory of fun, right? But I think there's something to be said about, you know, just delivering a lot of value and creating something silly, something stupid. You know, I just watched this YouTube video. It was like a stupid, it was a really stupid video of like somebody doing a silly animation, and it had 70 million views, and it was like a total stupid video. And somebody in the comment section said, "Oh my God, why would you spend your life making this? Like, why would you make this?" And of course, it's only a 10-second video, but it's like, why would you make this? Dude, he made it for 70 million people. I mean, maybe he didn't know the audience would be there, but it's like, I'm happy you did, because clearly you provided a little bit of maybe a joke, a stupid laugh or something to a bunch of people, and I think that's wonderful. I think that's really amazing. And I think we could lose that, because I think I'm somebody who's often thinking about the impact of my work. And I guess we could get a little bit more serious here, but I have to say, you know, sometimes I feel kind of sad, because I have a really good education, and I'm a good engineer, and yet I'm working on video games, which are a little bit trivial, right? Isn't that a little bit silly? Somebody who went to Stanford, one of the best universities in the world, making video games, you know, child's toys. Isn't that a little bit silly? I've thought that myself, you know. I'm my own harshest critic, of course, and I've thought, you know, there's a lot of important causes I could be contributing to, like fighting slavery and the housing crisis, and you've decided you want to help kids earn V-Bucks in Fortnite, and, well, what do you got to say for yourself, Ventures? Well, I think, you know what? I think there's a lot of value in making kids smile. I think there's a lot of value in providing a little bit of joy. And I think in many ways when Keanu Reeves is sort of saying it to himself, we entertained, I felt like he was speaking to me in a way. And he was saying, you know what, we entertained, and that's incredible too. So that's my thoughts. All right. So clearly that one took way too long, so I should go a little bit faster. Okay. This next quotation, they say quote is a verb and quotation is the noun. I don't know if you've heard that. So if I refer to this, I'm supposed to say it's a quotation. So this quotation is from the guy who founded the company called One Day's Wages. One Day's Wages is a charity where the idea is you give the amount of one day's wages. People often say, you know, how much do I give? And this idea is like, what if you could just spend one of the days in your year working for somebody else? You know, if you make 100K a year, and there's maybe 300 days in a year, what's 100K divided by 300? Well, divided by 3 is 3,000. Divided by 3 is 30,000. Divided by 300, you drop 2 zeros, so that's 300. So that would be $300, right? I think so, right? 100,000 divided by 300, 300. Sorry, 100,000 divided by 300 is 300. Yeah, $333, right? I think so. Let me know if I'm wrong in the comments, please. So the idea would be that's what you donate. But that's not what the quote is. I'm getting ahead of myself. So I went up to this guy, right? So this guy runs this charity. And I was at this gala. It was like it was a donation thing. I was there, and I was donating. I was there to donate for some cause, and I thought it was a just cause. And I was a little bit perturbed. I got to be honest with you, folks. I was a little bit angry because I had read recently about a charity that was non-for-profit, and a lot of people were making money as a result of collecting donations for people who were not, it wasn't for them, you know. So they were making money basically while running a charity and getting rich while running a charity. And that irked me. I felt there was something fundamentally wrong about that. You know, you're doing a charity. Isn't that supposed to be for the greater good? Aren't you supposed to be benefiting other people? How could you be doing that for profit? That just didn't seem right. And I expressed that to this man. And he said to me, a 3-word quotation. He said, "Matthew, it's all good." And man, that's probably the quotation I've come back to the most out of everything on this list. I've been thinking about that a lot. He said, it's all good. And what he meant by that is, whether it's non-for-profit, whether you're donating 100% of the profits, whether you're donating 10% of the profits, it's good. It's good. And we should encourage that, and we should embrace that. And if you're getting rich while benefiting others, that's good too. One of the things I've been thinking about this a little bit, I'm reading right now a book called Doing Good Better, which is about effective altruism, and it's this idea that you could donate to one charity $10, and it could go a lot further than if you donated $10 to the other charity. Not all causes are equal, and not all charities are efficient as the other ones, right? But here's the thing. Yes, you could do good better, but that's not to say that a little bit of good is bad, right? A little bit of good is good, and a lot of good is better, right? That's the thing. So a little bit of good is still good. It's not bad. And so I think that's true. So I think if somebody's doing something that's good, you know, a lot of people say don't let perfect be the enemy of the good, you know. If somebody is doing something that's a little bit nice, but they could be just doing something nicer, you know, you might feel the intention to go to them and say, hey, you know, why aren't you doing something that's perfect? You know, it's like, well, you know what, they're doing something good. And I think that's valuable. So I love this quote. It's all good. That really stuck with me. Oh my gosh, I love this next quote. I love this quote so much. I gotta get a drink though. I've been talking too much. And oh my god, I don't have my cups here. This is terrible. All right, well, I'll just keep going for your sake. Sorry if my voice gets a little hoarse. But here's the next question, or quotation rather. And I was feeling unconfident. I'll tell you, I was feeling a little bit maybe uncomfortable because I felt like I was learning in my job. I felt like I was pretty good, but I didn't know if I was great. And I didn't even know, like, if you're an engineer or really at anything at your job, how do you know if you're great? Like, how do you know if you're great at your job? And so I had met with this engineer and we had a little coffee chat, and I just felt compelled to ask him. So I just asked him point blank. I said, how do you know if you're great at your job? And I'll never forget what he told me. He told me, and I won't be able to summarize this in a short quotation, I think. But I tried to recontextualize it in an example, which is where basically he said this. He said, you know that you're great at your job when you don't worry about how to do it. You worry about to what extent... Let me go back. He said, you don't know... He said, how do you know if you're great at your job? He said, you know you're great at your job when you don't worry about how to do it. You worry about to what extent should you do it. So let me explain that a little bit. In the comic Superman, of course, the alien, the Martian, or the alien from Kryptonite, right? It's not Mars, it's another planet though. He basically comes, he's a little alien baby, and then he grows up here, but he's super strong and he shoots laser beams out of his eyes and all this crazy shit, right? And but one of his most iconic traits of course, Superman, is that he's really, really strong. A little bit too strong. Sometimes he doesn't know how strong he is. And as a kid, maybe he has to sort of hide how strong he is. And he has to go to a business meeting, okay, in one of these comics. And he has to give the other man a handshake. And he's in a difficult situation. Because if he shakes the hand like a flaccid cock, the guy's gonna be freaked out. You ever give somebody a limp dick handshake? The old flaccid fish? One of these? That's terrible, right? It's practically a joke when somebody gives you one of those. If they don't hold your hand firmly, it feels like a wet noodle, right? That's disgusting. Don't want that in your hand. In this context. So when you give somebody a handshake, it's got to be firm. It's got to be firm, and that's going to make them feel comfortable and feel assured. But that's a bit of a problem for Superman, isn't it? Because if he holds their hand too firm, he'll crush it. He'll have a bleeding pulp in his hand where that man's hand and fingers used to be. So how hard does he hold the other guy's hand? That's a difficult question. And it's in that moment Superman knew he was pretty fucking strong. That's the same principle being applied to determine whether you're a great engineer. I know it sounds a little silly, a little bit convoluted, but let me explain. Bear with me for one moment. When you're doing an engineering problem, and you're a noob, you might not even know how to solve the problem. And you got to look that up. You got to figure it out. You got to learn it. And then you know. You know one way, at least. But when you are a little bit more experienced, you might face a problem and think from it a different perspective. Because you know how to solve the problem the easy way. That is maybe quick, but less performant, less optimal, but easy to do. But you might also know the complicated way. That takes a little bit longer, but may not be worth the time effort and time investment. So which do you do? That's exactly what I'm talking about. Instead of worrying about how to solve the problem, you worry about to what extent should you do it. You're not worried about if you can grip the hand hard. You're Superman. You know you can grip the hand hard. The question is how hard. That's when you know you're great, is when you have to determine to what extent, you need to expend the effort, to expend the force. And so when you're working on a problem, I think that's the answer. So we've all have some degree of competence in some area where we can decide this is the quick way to do it or this is the right way to do it. And in those areas, you probably can express some degree of mastery, at least more than somebody who only knows how to do one way. So that's I think a very interesting way to think about that. Okay, so man, that probably took forever. Okay, I guess this is going to be a long video. Holy shit, we're at half an hour. Okay, well, if you've stuck with me this far, hey, how's it going? We're going to just keep going, and I'm going to tell you the rest. I think we're about halfway through, but these are some quotes that have stuck with me, and I guess each one of them is going to have some crazy backstory because that's what it's looking like it's going to be, so we're just going to go with it. Okay, so the next one is, man, oh my gosh, I was watching a documentary on the song Bohemian Rhapsody. Maybe you've heard it. It's a classic song, but it is iconic in some ways for how queer, how strange a song it is. Little high, little low, will you do the fandango? All that crazy shit. How's it go? The thunderbolts of lightning, very, very frightening. Mamma mia, Figaro. I don't know the words. I don't really know the words. But it's an amazing song. It's so crazy. And I don't know how to sing, obviously. But they said that song, they said it was incredible. One of the best songs they had heard. But it wasn't influential. Because it came out so innovative and yet so crystallized in what it wanted to do that there was nothing else left to say. There was nowhere to go from that. It was so odd, unique, and on its own that it wasn't innovative. It wasn't influential. It was innovative. It was innovative. It did something different. It did something creative. It did something unique. But it wasn't influential because nobody else could pull from it. Nobody else could take something away from it, And I don't know if that's true for the song, but that's what this person in the documentary said. And I thought that was fascinating because I've always thought that the best stuff was influential stuff, If somebody is a really good programmer or author or musician, I would think it's because they're pretty influential and that people will take something from their work and use it in their own work. I never thought of it like that you could have something that's really incredible but not be influential just because it's like it's fully formed, It's kind of figured out. And I thought that was a really interesting take. Okay, let's keep going. Yeah, I realize I gotta explain some of these, right? Because they're a little non-intuitive, right? Oh my gosh, this is a quote. I think a woman who is a very important woman in my life said to me, which is a whole nother story probably we won't get into. But she said to me, Matthew, you don't have to marry everyone you fall in love with. And I'll leave it at that. All right, the next quote from God of War. Ooh, man, I love this quote. So this was from working on the video game God of War. I didn't work on the video game, I should clarify. Otherwise, I'm sure someone will be annoyed if I take credit for that. I worked on God of War Ragnarok, the next game. So what did they say in that game? So They said this when they were developing the game. They said, all 8s make a 10. What does that mean? All 8s make a 10. What they meant was, in a video game, there are so many things you could do. This calls back a little bit to the Mark Norris quote, you could do anything but not everything. It's this idea that there's many different things in a video game. There's the music, there's the combat, there's the, not in all games, but in this particular game, there was music, there was combat, there was narrative, there was this relationship with the sun in a ludological sense, there was UI, and the UI sucked. It was really bad. This is, of course, not in the release game, and this was when they were doing the prototyping. And the UI was not very good, pretty late in the project. And they said, you know what? If we were to rate all these categories, it's sort of like we've got, 5, 7, 10, 7, 2. So everything's pretty good. Some things are really great, but one thing's really bad. And they said, you know what? That's kind of bringing the project down. If we can rally around this idea that all 8s make a 10, it's this idea of like, if you can just make everything great, not perfect, but if you can make everything great, the result will be perfect, or it will look perfect. And people will then not be distracted by something that's bad, and they can instead be focused on something that's perfect. And in that way, the whole game will feel perfect in a sense. So I think that's actually something really magical. So it's this idea of like, it's sort of like saying, hey, you know what? If you're really good at a bunch of things and great at something, but really bad at something, maybe it makes more sense to, instead of worrying about becoming perfect at the things you're really good at, just becoming less bad at the one thing you're really bad at. And I think the result is overall, it's going to add this like halo effect. And suddenly, because when you're playing a game, it is in such a way, or when you're interacting with a piece of software, if there's a little bug, it could really bring your whole experience down. And so it's like, if that little bug is just off the map, it's good enough that it doesn't enter your periphery of focus, then you could really focus on the parts of the game that matter and the parts of the game that are great. So I think that's I've really thought about that, and I think it's so true. I haven't included that this quote, but it reminds me of another quote which has been pretty influential in my life, where I was in wrestling, and I was in baseball. So it's this idea that on baseball, there's this. So in baseball, this is of course a sport, the great American pastime, some might say. And there are different positions you could play in baseball, and one of the positions is the pitcher. And the pitcher has to throw the ball very fast. It's sort of a unique position. There's not a lot of people, frankly, maybe the first baseman does this a little bit, but there's not a lot of people who have to do what the pitcher has to do. It's a very unique position, sort of like the quarterback in football. And there's this funny thing that happens as a result of that, where though the pitcher is, of course, the only one who does the pitching, everybody on the team has to bat. Batting is when you try to hit the ball with a baseball bat. And the pitchers very often suck at batting. So you'll have some pitchers who are great at pitching, but they're really bad at batting. And I think that's so fascinating. That's really interesting, right? And I think it's really wonderful too, because it's this idea that like you don't have to be great at everything. You just have to be not terrible, but you could be great at one really good thing, and then you could succeed. My wrestling coach had said to me, the best baseball players are not perfect at everything. Maybe they're perfect or really great at one or two things, and that everything else they're just very good. They're just not bad at anything. So I think that's a factor. It's not a question of like whether or not you're perfect at something. It's just, can you just minimize how bad you are at some things? So I think it's an interesting framework. Oh man, that reminds me of another quote where I was listening to somebody who was talking about the Olympics, and he said, I kind of don't like the Olympics. And I said, well, why don't you like looking at Olympic figure skaters? And he said, well, here's the thing. I feel like Olympic figure skaters are all great. Like all really, really great. And so the competition just comes down to figuring out who's going to mess up. So it's not a question of like who's going to do the best trick. It just becomes a situation of like who's going to make a mistake first. And I don't think that's true, but it's an interesting take, isn't it? I think that's that's another interesting quote that for whatever reason has stuck with me. All right, whatever. Let's move on. I'm going. I just went into 3 different quotes, and I was only supposed to do 1, so I need to keep moving here. I love quotes, in case you haven't noticed, or quotations, I should say. I like I said, I just feel like they're crystallized wisdom. I think they're crystallized wisdom or perspective, crystallized perspective. Okay, let's keep going. I think 5 more. So here's the next one. John Carmack, of course, the greatest programmer alive today. He had a quote, and he said, I don't like thinking about where we could be in 10 years. He says, I like thinking about where we could be right now. We've got the technology. We've got the people. We're just not harnessing it. He's like, we can be at, whatever the latency is right now. We could do it. There's nothing stopping us. We don't need to think about where we could be in 10 years. Fuck it. We could be here tomorrow if we just put the effort in, if we put the people in, if we make it happen. And I love that. I love that idea. So he's it's just, oh, wow, what a sentiment, right? He's like, fuck the future. Let's do it today. I love that. I love that so much. It reminds me a little bit of Bill Gates. Okay, yeah, I'm going to go on another quote here. Bill Gates, of course, my buddy. In case you haven't seen that video, we met each other for a brief moment in Stanford. Of course, I'm joking. It's a very silly video. We only made eye contact. But it was an intimate moment nonetheless. And Bill Gates has this great quote where they ask him, they're talking to Bill Gates about Elon Musk, who's, of course, a very prominent billionaire, and Jeff Bezos, who's another prominent billionaire. I think one of the richest man in the world, depending on how you look at it. That's a whole nother topic, because he's not the richest man in the world. The Saudi king is the richest man in the world, but he's the richest man in the free world, is what they should say. But of course, they're not going to say that, so it's a whole different situation. Because power is not just equity, right? I mean, it's not just wealth, right? So I'll go on that rant another time. But anyways, they said to Bill Gates, what do you think about these guys, Elon and Jeff Bezos, making all these spaceships and trying to go to Mars and outer space? What do you think about that? You trying to get to Mars, Bill Gates? You trying to go in a spaceship, Bill Gates? What do you think about that? And he said, of course, he always says, he's got that voice. He's like, well, I don't know, So he says, I'm not looking at Mars, man. I'm looking at Earth. He's like, we got a lot of shit to do on this planet. There's a lot of things that are going wrong. There's a lot of things we need to fix. And so those problems are not going to go away if we go to Mars. So I'm focused on what we have here. I'm focused on the right now, the right here. Well, I guess this guy Carmack, he's like, I'm focused on the right now. Bill Gates, he was kind of saying, I'm focused on right here. He's saying, we've got a planet. Let's not squander it. Let's focus on things like global warming, like malaria, like women's education. And let's address those issues. We don't need to go to another planet. We've got one. And I think that's a really interesting quote in itself. So we could talk about that another time. Okay. So here's another quote. Okay, so this is an interesting quote. I don't remember who said it, but they were talking about Steve Jobs. And they were saying, Steve Jobs led a tragic life. Because wherever he looked at products, he was unhappy. Because products sucked. And there's many products that are just poorly designed. And he was just in a constant state of unhappiness. Because everything was problematic. And I thought that was an interesting little quotation. Because I felt that way many times. As you guys know, I've made YouTube videos just complaining about people's websites many times on this channel. And many times on my previous channel. I had a whole series called Bad UI. Maybe I'll start it again. I don't know. And I feel that. I really felt for him in that quotation. And I know Steve Jobs, he's one of those people whose lives have been really told in a romantic way. I think a lot of the stuff that is used to describe Steve Jobs is like totally bullshit. People who are close to him have said, you know, a lot of the stuff he says, like how he wakes up in the mirror and asks himself every day whether or not he's happy. Like they're like, that's not true. But even though Steve Jobs is a bullshitter, I think I can relate to him a lot. Also kind of an asshole, but we'll keep going. Okay, the next quote. All right, I talked about that one already. It's a repeat of a previous quote. Oh, I love this one. This is another one by JBlow. As I told you, JBlow is a big inspiration of mine. You know, he's somebody I certainly look up to. He's a gameplay engineer. He's a systems engineer now, I guess. Language engineer now. But he's made a lot of video games. Well, maybe not a lot. He's made 2 big ones, he likes to say. Or maybe it's 3 now, I'm not sure. And he was talking about summarizing a game. Because sometimes people want to say, you know, hey, John, what was that game about? What was the message? And John says something to the effect of, if I could have told you the meaning of the game, the message, then I would have told you. So I think that's a beautiful thing. Of course, dovetailing into Marshall McLuhan, the famous quote, "The medium is the message," where Marshall is, of course, saying, with respect to film, that a big part of the message of the film is how it's told. You know, a big element of a song is who's singing it, and what's the key, and what's the instruments, not just the story of the song. Because of course, you know, a happy song can be sung sad, and certainly a sad song can be sung happy, or maybe I should use the adverb there, happily. And I think there's something going on there with John in this quotation where he's basically saying the feeling, the message, the whole idea that I wanted you to get from experiencing the game cannot be adequately summarized in words. Of course, I can summarize it, but in that case, it's an optimization. We've lost something, and it is essentially different from what I want you to walk away from experiencing the game with. You know, it's not the same as the experience if I'm just going to give you the cliff notes, and I think that's a beautiful way to say it. So I totally agree with him. I think that's so true. And I think about that a lot too, because I'm a creative person. Of course, I think about video game ideas, and I think, should this be a video game, or maybe this should be a book, or maybe it should be a quotation, or a song, or something like that. My friend, you know, he was going to make a dating service, and he said, you know, it's going to be a dating app, and I said, you know, why does it have to be an app, right? Why do you start there? Why does it have to be an app? Doesn't, you know. There's this good quote. We were watching this video where there was a guy talking about prototyping, or what he calls predotyping, where he was basically saying, you know, maybe you could test it out before you even make the app. You know, test out the flow, test out the customer experience, test out whether or not it's an idea even worth pursuing. And I think it's really important to consider the medium in any artistic endeavor. So that is that. Okay, here's another one of those really beautiful quotes that you could probably think about for a while, but I think this one's a lot more succinct than the fire one. At least it seems more intuitive. The quote is, "A falling knife has no handle." Of course, referring to this idea that, well, I don't think I need to explain it to you. I'm sure you understand it, but if a knife is falling, you don't want to grab it because it's going to cut you, probably. The likelihood of you grabbing it by the handle is very low. So the idea is, of course, don't grab a falling knife. So what's the parallel in real life? Oh boy, I'm sure you know a lot. I'll leave that as an exercise to the listener. All right, and one more quote. Okay, this is one I came up with. So this quote is saying, you know, there's a difference between walking distance and running distance. I was, well, frankly, me and my best friend Scott Mulligan were stranded in the middle of Korea, and we were trying to get from here to there, and I was looking at the map, and Scott said, "Hey, what direction is it?" And I said, "Well, we're gonna have to go this way for a while, and then we'll have to go this way, and then that way." And he says, "All right, let's get a move on." And he starts to run, with his big hiking backpack. And I said, "Scott, it's not running distance, it's walking distance." And by that I meant, if we run, we're gonna tire ourselves out. There's no way we could run that far. We're gonna be walking, and we're gonna be walking for hours. So we're gonna walk it. We can't run it. And I think that's fascinating because I think it's a really interesting way to look at the problem. Because I guess it's the same thing as somebody saying, "Hey, everybody, chill out. Don't go too hard. Remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint." You probably heard that in the workplace or something. But I like this idea of running versus walking, because they really have no real consequence when it comes to the distance something is. I guess speed does affect distance. No, it doesn't. It doesn't affect distance. Speed affects time, but it doesn't affect distance. So I think that's kind of interesting, right? Just to think about it as like, oh, this is a problem that I can't solve fast. I need to go through it methodically, slow, and pay attention to what I'm doing. That's maybe a parallel. All right, so those are all the quotes I thought of, and I guess I threw in quite a few other ones that just came to my mind as I was thinking about it. But I'd love to hear if there's any quotes that are important to you. Anything that you think about at various times. I'm always thinking about these quotes and other stuff. I'm somebody who really likes to mull things. MULL. Think about thoughts, and I think quotations are really nice, again, because they're short and I can remember them. I'm not good at remembering stuff, so it's nice to have it in a concrete, a little chunk. Yeah. So that's all I've got for you today. I hope you have a wonderful day. Goodbye.